there seemed an obvious business case there to put forward to them that perhaps they should actually own Red Jungle rather than lease developers effectively or run it through projects. And they agreed. So we went through a due diligence process, and they basically are now the only shareholders in the company.
This is the Ryan Marketing Show, and you're listening to episode 11 of 100. Today, I'm at Red Jungle with CEO Phil Gale. How you doing, Phil?
Hi, Ryan. How's it going?
Good, man. Great to be here. I got a question, because right on the door, you're Red Jungle. Where did that name come from?
It was a very complicated process of mashing together two random words and then seeing whether the .com was available. And that was the best I could come up with at the time. I wanted something a bit interesting and a bit funky. And it's worked out all right for us so far. It's been quite a good point of difference, good brand.
So the brand followed the name. There was nothing specific about Red or Jungle?
No, not really. Just, it was just trying to come up with something a bit interesting. So, yeah.
Do you think it's important for companies to not just have the .co, but to have the .com? Like, is that something you were thinking going to a global marketplace from day one, or you just prefer the .com?
I don't know if it's essential for most businesses, but given that we were going to be doing mainly web stuff, I wanted a .com. I'm not entirely sure why I felt it was important, but it was for me at the time.
When was that?
2005.
Okay.
2005, late 2005, yeah.
So that's a long time in the software business.
Yeah.
What's your secret?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going. One is I think we're quite good at empathizing with end users, so the software we build tends to be quite well received. But also there's just a little bit of, I think, luck and coincidence in terms of getting into the industry right as it was undertaking a big change to software as a service and everything moving online and things like that. A little bit serendipitous, to be honest. It was a good time to be in software the last 10 years.
So explain a little bit more about what that change has been for people that maybe don't understand the buying a server with all the software on it versus buying a license to a server that you never see with software that you don't necessarily own. Like, how do you explain that out?
So I guess it was sort of, the traditional model was you'd have your PC or for your desktop-based apps, so accounting was a good example with Xero. You'd buy a piece of software off the shelf, potentially even at a retail store, install it, and it was yours, and that was it. And you may get free upgrades or something along those lines. So that model has a very long turnaround for updates and potentially bug fixes and things like that. So your software... and also because you have to pay for upgrades a lot of the time, you tend to have people lagging on older versions of that software. So there's a long tail on support and getting features and things like that. The new sort of software as a service is about switching that model up, so you're not actually buying the software, you're renting a license effectively for it, but it means that recurring revenue can be used to continually improve the software that you're using while you're using it. So there's a much, much quicker turnaround for getting new features or changing the way something works if it doesn't work well. Which overall just leads to much better software. I think you've got a much tighter feedback loop as well, from customers. So that's the model that most software is moving towards, or if not already well there. And that's firmly where we sit in terms of what we build as well.
And so what makes you different is that you're not a software as a service company, you're actually the people who build software as a service companies. So over the last 10 years, what have been some of the real successes for you of building cloud software?
Yeah, so as you say, so our model has more been around partnering with people who are perhaps industry experts. People in, say, real estate, for example, which is the best example I have because they're by far our most successful customer. They're very good at real estate. They know the industry. They're very good. They have all those connections. But what we're really good at doing is building software. So partnering with people in industries that know those verticals and know those niches really well can lead to some really strong relationships, I guess, and some really strong software offerings. So yeah, we're sort of chameleons in terms of every project we take on, we suddenly learn a new industry almost as well. So yeah.
So by having someone who's a subject matter expert in their domain of knowledge and their industry, it makes it much easier to create great software because you're building a rule set around someone who knows in depth the problems and opportunities within their industry.
Yeah, and perhaps we'll generally do a better job of translating that into software than perhaps they would if they took it on themselves, which has happened over the years as well.
So for the released one that you've mentioned, what does that mean in terms for them and then for their customer? What are some of the things that have changed their industry because of this software way of approaching things?
I think primarily one of the big things it's giving people is access to a lot of third-party services or integration points, a lot of expansion across different areas, because property spans a lot of different areas across that sort of horizontal stack, right through from letting to selling properties and all sorts of things. So being able to build a platform for those customers that has grown over time and started integrations with those things is sort of bringing it all together into one very cohesive product, which perhaps would be arguably very difficult to do in a traditional model. And we've sort of seen that become something that their customers really desire going forward, and it's become, I guess, the norm almost over this time frame. People get quite frustrated with software that they have to install now, and they have to go and open something else to do something else, So yeah, from that's from their customers' point of view. From Release themselves, I guess they've gained a development partner out of it, and it's been quite a strong relationship. It's a very one-on-one sort of or a very tight consultative process. But as I say, I think the translation from their requirements into how we build software works quite well.
So then going back in time and looking at some of the customer opportunities that maybe you've said no to along the way, and what are some of the things that you know that are not necessarily going to be as successful when you're working with an industry or an area that may not yet be suited to software, or they may not have that full understanding? Like, is that part of what you do? Is that qualification process?
Absolutely. We've turned away plenty of people trying to do projects, or we've done our best to consult with them and give them honest feedback on what we think about the chances of success of that software. Generally speaking, it's little things like they underestimate the willingness of end users to input information all the time. So they'll make an assumption that users will always come and enter some information about what they're doing. Users are generally pretty lazy, I would say. So if you're trying to build a product based around collecting information or something of that nature, the incentive or the reward for providing information needs to be very, very strong. But yeah, and then there's always the classic examples of trying to take on auction sites and things like that. They come along quite frequently. I think that's a really good way to throw a lot of money away. And the other classic one we see a lot is people who come to us with a budget for development that has absolutely no further thought into then actually selling and marketing that product.
Right.
Because if you've got a budget to build software and you assume that it's going to be successful on day one, you're probably wrong. So marketing is a huge part of selling software. So, or building a successful product, I should say. So those are sort of the classic mistakes I see.
For Red Jungle early on, how did you market yourselves?
So I built a brand around Red Jungle and little logo, and that was, again, it's almost timing, because that's sort of when social media was starting to kick up as well. So I still am all over Twitter, but I have less time for it now. And I used to go along to all the tweet ups and got involved with, there's a really cool bunch of guys at geekzone.co.nz, which is a really cool technology website. Got involved with those guys and went to a lot of meetups and things like that. So by far it was word of mouth and just going and meeting people. I've never made any sort of formal marketing approaches to anything else other than going and seeing people, to be honest. And then from that, most of our work's come through referrals.
Okay.
And just built up over time.
And so I guess in those early days, working on the right projects then led you to the right type of referrals to the next types of businesses.
Yep.
When did the released one, which is your major one, when did that come along?
So that was 4 or 5 years ago, I think. And that actually came about because we were at the time one of only 2 companies who were certified Xero add-on developers. So again, a bit of marketing through being in Xero's add-on directory. We happened to be the one closest to them as a local company as well. And so we picked them up, but there was a pretty instant rapport there, so we get on very well. And that's how we came across those clients. That's that one.
That's interesting, actually. So by being in a situation where the marketplace is growing around that Xero ecosystem and being very early on with only one other there, that became a very easy route to get what's become quite a large client for you. Yeah,
well, it was certainly a very deliberate action to get listed there, because I mean, ultimately developing with the Xero API is not terribly difficult. So it was more just going through the paces and showing them, we know what we're doing, and getting listed there. I did think it would generate more work than it has over the time frame, but it's certainly the ones that it has generated work for have been, very important. So, in saying that, there's a heck of a lot more now, all around the world, of those partners. So.
Then looking internally to your business here, you're based in Ahuriri and Hawke's Bay. And we bumped into each other early on today when we were getting our early morning coffees.
Yep.
And you introduced me to a new staff member. How big has it grown, and where do you think you're going with the business?
So it started out with me working out of a spare bedroom 10, 11 or 10 and a half years ago. And then I've sort of formed some business partnerships with business partners like Gerard sitting out there, and another guy, Matthew, who's since gone back to the States. And so we sort of, I'd say about 5-6 years ago, we set up just up the road in Ahuriri with the 3 of us there, started taking on interns out of EIT. It's actually some very talented people coming out of EIT.
Oh, good. So I'm doing a mentoring session there tomorrow. So.
Good. Yeah, no, we've had a lot of luck with students coming out of EIT over the years. And then, so we sort of went on for a few years working on projects, got to about, I think it was 5, 6 over that time frame. And then in the last sort of 3-4 years, once we started getting a lot of success through some of these products like Released, the requirement for developers shot up and we started a real recruitment drive. So right now we're sitting on 13. We've got 2 staff permanently based in Wellington at the moment, and one guy who's having a bit of a sabbatical over in Thailand, of all places, who's due back shortly, but he's been working full-time in his time zone as well for about a year now. It fluctuates a little bit. We've found over the time frame anything above 10 tends to, you get fluctuation up or down throughout the year. So we've had people come and go in that time, but around about 10 to 13 is where we sit most of the time, and that's quite a good number for taking on at least a couple of very good sized projects at any given time.
Okay. And how do you go about training to make sure that you've got the right balance of people that are learning from those EIT grads through to making sure you've got the right senior people who can look after that that technical debt that does get incurred over a few years of doing this type of work?
Yeah, so we're quite picky about who we hire, which is hard in Hawke's Bay. There's not a lot of sort of senior level software developers floating around in Hawke's Bay. So we work hard to try and attract them, or we have in recent years when it's become a problem for us. We work hard to try and attract them, which is why we opened an office in Wellington, for example, try and tap into a pool of people there. But we vet them quite hard, but one of the key criteria for us is that we have to like them. So we make sure they come to Hawke's Bay and that they spend some time with us. We take them out for lunch and all those sorts of things, and we just chat and we just see if we get along. So that's half of it. Once you know you can get along with them and you can talk fine, then it's just you need to make sure that you can cover off all the actual technical requirements for them as well. And I think generally speaking, you know pretty much straight away whether or not they know their stuff or not and what level they're at. So yeah, finding people at that top tier is quite hard in Hawke's Bay, and it's a continuing challenge for us, and we're in fact, well, probably put an ad out tomorrow again as well.
Would you consider importing?
We have done. We have done that. Certainly, yep. I don't have any particular preference. The main criteria for us, I think, in Hawke's Bay is they need to have a really good reason to be in Hawke's Bay, because it's very easy to slip out and go, I want to head off to Auckland or Wellington now because that's where all the opportunity is. So yeah, they want to be here for the right reason, because we don't want to be trying to hold them here either. We want them to enjoy the lifestyle that we have here. That's why we're here, and we want them to understand that there are those opportunities for good software developers in Hawke's Bay as well. But yeah, that's the senior level. In terms of them balancing junior and intermediate level people, we just watch that happen. Of course, you have a bit of a problem because all your junior people become intermediate people eventually. So we try not to get too bottom heavy in there. And so some years we'll take interns in, and some years we might not for that reason. Just depends on who sticks around potentially as well.
In terms of looking at industries out there, maybe after hours, like I know I do it with, I'm always looking at how can a business potentially market it themselves better. Do you have an on-off switch where you go home and it's turned off, or are you looking at things on the news or in social and going, man, they should, if they had cloud service on that industry, it would transform it?
I would generally do quite a bit of work in the evenings. That said, I've got a new daughter, so it's a bit easier for me to spend less time on that at the moment because time's short. But yeah, generally speaking, I do quite a bit of work in the evenings. That's when I do a lot of reading and a lot of, so if I'm going to do social media stuff, that's when I do it, and catch up on emails and things like that. So yeah, I don't tend to switch off in the evenings, but yeah, there's a healthy mix of it, I would say, at the moment for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Certainly, as I'm getting older, it's getting less. Let's put it that way.
And now we've talked about this before, but you're actually running the business, but not necessarily owning the business. The business has been exited.
Yep.
Talk us through that process.
So we had an opportunity. So Released has been a very successful, by far our most successful client. They've had a number of pretty exciting opportunities appear with partnerships overseas and going into new countries and new territories, doing some really innovative things in the industry, which is quite exciting. And as part of that, their development requirements are increasing all the time as well. So when we looked at costing that up in terms of what they were looking at doing, there seemed an obvious business case there to put forward to them that perhaps they should actually own Red Jungle rather than lease developers effectively or run it through projects, and they agreed. So we went through a due diligence process, and they basically are now the only shareholders in the company. So what that meant for us was they wanted to maintain pretty much the status quo. So Gerard and I still directors and run the company, but we just have a couple of additional seats on the board now. So from a software point of view and from a staff point of view, nothing's really changed. But it's given us an opportunity to perhaps find a more solid approach for them as they grow, I guess. And it's allowed us to focus in a little bit better rather than running around looking for work, I would say.
It gives you some breathing space to be able to look longer term for the release side of things, while also you can still pick up other projects.
Absolutely. So we're around about 50-50 at the moment. Huh. Yeah. So
the best of both worlds, really. You've got that assurance, but at the same time you've got that flexibility that keeps people interested and keeps the creative side of things going when you've got different code and problems to solve.
Yeah, so there's still plenty of opportunities to work on different things here, which is nice. I'm sort of relishing the opposite of that, because I used to be across a number of clients, and now I've got an opportunity to actually focus in on something, which is quite a nice change for me for a while at least, I would think. It's nice to actually do a good job of one thing for a while.
How does other coding houses, where do they sit in the marketplace versus Red Jungle? And if a client's or a person out there's got not only a great idea but maybe a proof of concept that they want to take further, do they just go to an organisation like yours, or do they farm it out for RFPs or bids to multiple coding houses?
It depends. So both of those things happen. Some people will come to us and they'll have a discussion and they'll just feel comfortable. I think a lot of it, especially if it's going to be a big investment, a lot of it's about just feeling comfortable.
Because these aren't small investments, right? They're 5-6 figures.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do occasionally participate in RFPs, but it's very rare, to be honest. It's not generally something that I want to be involved in an RFP process, because I tend to think it's probably not going to end up with the best result for the customer. So it's more about those relationships and levels of trust, and just being honest and trying to actually give genuine feedback about hey, these are the problems I see with what you're proposing and things like that, as opposed to just saying yep, we can do it, sign here sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, in terms of other software houses around, I mean, I've not been involved too much, so I can't really say what they get up to, but I know the way that we work is pretty open and honest.
And that's got to be important, because it's one of those things that once the build's happened and you've launched the software, that's just the beginning of it, in that the market gives you feedback.
Yeah.
And that feedback requires changes to the software and to the business rules, and that's never ending.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because it is important if you're planning to build software as a service, you've got to understand that you are effectively becoming a software company, in terms of it's never finished. If you have a successful product, then it should be being iterated on.
Do they understand that whole model, that this is 7 to 10 years potentially before getting a full return, and that there's so much sunk cost up front in the build part, and then re-engineering the build to fit and align to a market, and once you've conquered that market, localize for another? Do they have that long-term mindset?
No, I would say most don't. So yeah, there's an education process in there in terms of what they're doing. It depends. Some customers come in and what they're planning to do is very low scale. So they just have an idea and they want to try it out, and they're prepared to spend a bit of money. And you kind of think, well, yeah, that could take off, and if it does, then they'll probably reevaluate or something like that. But people who are planning on spending a decent amount of money, yeah, it's certainly something that we discuss with them. Because I guess from our point of view as well, I mean, that's our business model. We want to partner with people, so we want to make sure that the people we're partnering with are successful in what they're doing as well, because it's good for us in the long term. So, yeah.
Where there's not that marketing need, so for example, cloudifying some internal processes for a large organisation, or the operational side of things, is that something that you look at for businesses as well? We've actually
just completed a very similar sounding project to that for a local port, for example, where it's becoming the norm that if you're going to take a piece of infrastructure inside or software-based infrastructure inside your organisation that you should be looking to future-proof it. It doesn't necessarily mean sort of full SaaS or it has to be web-based, but you should certainly be considering the fact that you don't want to host it internally. Generally speaking, you want to get rid of your bare metal. You want to be able to take advantage of scale and things like that out on these cloud platforms that are becoming very cheap and very reliable generally. So it's certainly more and more we're seeing things like that. But equally, we also see a lot of the time people underestimating the cost of doing that as well, and so it becomes. I think it's the software industry in general is moving towards SaaS, and I think the businesses with all their internal intranet-based models are getting there as well. But I don't think they're quite there yet because it's still quite difficult for them to find budget to do things like that. But yeah, certainly it's happening more and more.
Do you think it's like a religious kind of thing where you've got those that just believe in cloud and SaaS and know that it will have that productivity gain versus the business case ones where it may not have that clear business case or return?
I think it's a bit of a mix. I think, yeah, probably in terms of internal applications when you're dealing with those, it's still very much a hard sell. But it depends. A lot of the time, depends who we're dealing with, because sometimes the contact you're dealing with is very much understands that, and they just need to, there's some kind of education process needs to go up the line. Just the people that sign off on that to say, well, yes, this is a serious investment that you're making, but it makes sense for these reasons, and there is a payoff for it long term. It's a sensible decision to make, and that can be quite hard sometimes for some of those people who are actually making those decisions to understand, because they're not in the industry, and that's fair enough. I can understand it, but it will happen. Yeah. And
for those tech geeks that are listening right now and thinking, Phil's talked all about his business, but he hasn't talked about the software. Like, what's the really cool stuff you're working on, the nitty gritty at the moment, the software, the languages, what's the cool stuff right now for you?
So we're a Microsoft shop. So we've always been a Microsoft shop. It's for no particular reason other than that's the languages and things that we like. Nothing against any other ones. I think they're all cool, but it's just not what we do. So most of the stuff we're doing is web-based software as a service backed by a SQL Server database. It's all written in ASP.NET, C#, MVC. We're dealing a lot now with really interesting JavaScript frameworks. So there's lots of stuff going on with Angular, those sorts of interesting frameworks. Lots of movements in all sorts of it. It's a very fast-paced industry at the moment. Microsoft have just, for ASP.NET, just completely open sourced it and rewritten it from scratch almost.
Wow.
For ASP.NET 6, I think it is, which they've now just renamed ASP.NET Core 1.0. So it's very interesting. I see this morning they announced they've acquired a company called Xamarin, which we're doing mobile app development, but you can write C#, and it compiles to native code for Android and iOS and all those sorts of things as well. So it's a very different Microsoft than 10 years ago now.
That's what I've heard, is that Microsoft's actually the cool kid. Now that they've realised open source is the way to go, they're actually the ones to watch out for.
I think they've realised that the way forward is to get everyone using their platform. So they want everyone on Azure, which is where we host everything, and they should just focus on making really cool tools and giving them away and getting as many people using them as possible and making it really easy to get your stuff up onto this infrastructure, because that's actually where they're going to make their money going forward. But yeah, they're doing some very cool things. They've got some really cool people in the right places at the moment.
Well, it sounds like you're really well positioned for the future, and you've done some fantastic things to get to that point that you're at now. So, hey, thanks very much for your time, Phil. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Ryan.
If you like this episode, remember to subscribe for free on iTunes. Simply search for The Ryan Marketing Show in the iTunes Store.